Elias Mercer had Clara Bell on her knees in the hay, her wrists bound with saddle leather, and to any soul standing in that barn, it looked like the kind of scene that ruined a woman forever. Her white blouse was torn at the shoulder, her hair had fallen loose across her face, and there was straw stuck to her skirt and her bare knees. She was crying now, not loud, not wild, just the kind of broken crying that made a person sound younger than they were. Elias stood behind her, one hand locked around her upper arm, the other braced near her shoulder, as if he meant to force her back down if she tried to rise. He wasn't gentle about it, but he wasn't cruel either. Just a man doing what he had to so she wouldn't get herself kicked to death by a half-scared mare in a dark stall. There was blood on his sleeve, though it wasn't clear whose blood it was. The barn door was mostly shut. The smell of horse sweat, leather, and old hay sat heavy in the throat. Then Clara twisted hard, and a frightened sound came out of her that would have stopped any decent man cold. That sound wasn't just the horse. It was the sound of a woman who'd learned that closed doors and strong hands usually meant pain at home. Elias tightened his hold. He looked like a hard old rancher, alone in a closed barn, doing something a married girl had no business enduring. That was the moment Vernon Bell stepped through the door. 2 men from Abilene came in right behind him, and what they saw was enough to damn Elias before he ever opened his mouth. A young wife on the ground, a middle-aged rancher over her, her wrists tied, her face wet with tears. Vernon went for his Colt, but he never cleared leather. Elias moved first, not for a gun, but for Clara, dragging her one step farther from the stall as the bay mare struck the boards and jerked back wild-eyed, all muscle and fear. Only then did one thing stop making sense. Clara did not flinch from Elias. She flinched from her husband. Ruth Harper, standing out in the yard with one hand over her mouth, caught that before anybody else did. And when Vernon hauled Clara toward the door, Ruth got close enough to see the fading bruise under the slipped cuff of her sleeve. So what had really happened in that barn? And why was Clara Bell more afraid of her husband than the man everyone thought had destroyed her a week earlier? Folks around Abilene would have told you Clara Bell had a decent enough life. She had a small house, husband who looked steady enough from the road, and a face folks remembered from the road. It all seemed respectable. That was Vernon's favorite kind of lie. Inside that house, Clara lived by the sound of his boots. If they came fast, she'd better have supper ready. The lamp trimmed, and no good reason at all for why she looked nervous. A man like Vernon didn't need to throw a punch every day. Truth be told, the worst ones rarely do. He worked a person over with silence, suspicion, and that steady drip of shame until they started apologizing for breathing too loud. Never asked where the money went. Never asked why her letters from her aunt stopped coming. Never asked why Vernon hated seeing her talk to anybody longer than half a minute. Not even Ruth Harper next door. Not even May Collins, the friend Clara had trusted since girlhood. May still came by with a smile, still sat at Clara's table, still called her sweetheart and honey, and still carried every private fear straight back to Vernon like a dog bringing in birds from the yard. Clara had not yet learned that some women smile warm and sell you cold. She only knew May always seemed to arrive right after an argument. And Vernon always seemed to know things Clara had never told him. There was one thing Vernon wanted more than obedience. He wanted the strip of grazing land Clara's father had left her near Smoky Hill River, worth real money in a dry Kansas summer. The deed sat in Clara's name, and that was the one fact Vernon couldn't bully his way around. Not without her signature, not without breaking her first. That strip of grass by Smoky Hill was worth more than many men cleared in a long season pushing cattle north. Elias Mercer had noticed pieces of this before anybody said a word. A bruise half hidden under Clara's cuff when she reached for the feed at Dawson's store. The way she startled when a man raised his voice, even if he was only laughing. The way Vernon answered for her every single time, like God had made him spokesman for both. Elias had seen that kind of fear once before, years back, and he'd done nothing until nothing could be done. That old failure still sat in him like a stone in a boot. One thing he rarely outruns is the shame of standing aside when he should have stepped in. So when May came riding out one blazing afternoon with news that Ruth had been hurt near the north fence of Mercer's ranch, Clara didn't stop to think. She just ran. and before Clara had cleared the yard, May had already turned her horse and ridden back to Vernon with the only message he was waiting for. Clara reached Mercer's north fence, breathing hard, one hand pressed to her side, and knew something was wrong before she ever stepped inside the barn. No dropped shawl, no voice calling for help, just a restless bay mare stomping in the shade, ears pinned back, eyes rolling white. A frightened one was worse, because fear spreads fast, and Clara had been living with fear so long she knew the smell of it better than most folks knew fresh bread. She took one step into the barn and heard the stall chain snap. Something struck Clara hard across the shoulder, and the next second she was down in the hay with dust in her mouth and pain shooting through her arm. She tried to crawl, but the horse kicked at the boards, wild and blind. Then Elias Mercer came around the far side of the stall like a man running straight into a fire. He caught Clara by the waist, dragged her back, and pulled her flat. A split second later, the mare lashed out so close the dust kicked up where Clara had been. Panic took hold of her, but it was older than that, the kind that comes from living too long with a man who teaches you that every closed space is bad news. Elias saw it all at once. He grabbed a length of saddle leather and looped it around her wrists in front. Not to hurt her, but to keep her from clawing free and stumbling straight back into the mare's reach. Then he held her low and steady while the horse struck the boards, snorted hard, and fought the stall like fear itself had gotten into her blood. It looked awful. Truth be told, it looked like ruin, and that was exactly what Vernon had planned. May Collins had seen Clara run for the ranch and ridden straight back to fetch him. He had been waiting no farther than the bend in the road, close enough to ride in the moment she stepped inside. He was already outside, already waiting, already making sure he would walk in at the worst possible moment with witnesses at his back and righteous anger on his face. He did not come to save his wife. He came to bury her name. If these old frontier stories still mean something to you, subscribe, settle in with a cup of tea, and tell me where you're listening from tonight. Because when Vernon finally opened that barn door, Clara Bell was about to learn just how cheap a jealous husband could sell a woman's future for. Vernon threw that barn door open like a man marching in to defend his honor. But the truth was uglier than that. He had already made up his mind before he ever saw Clara in the hay. Those two men weren't there to help. They were there to remember, because men like Vernon never just hurt you. They made sure the whole town helped finish the job. He shouted Clara's name first, then shouted Elias Mercer's louder, like volume alone could turn a lie into fact. Elias let go of Clara slowly, breathing hard, dust on his face, that iron grip finally loosening. The bay mare was still striking the boards and blowing foam. He knew one wrong move now, one hard word. One hand too fast toward a gun, and Vernon would have the last piece of the story he needed. Her legs nearly gave out. She caught herself on a post, breathing fast, one shoulder bent low from where the strap had hit her. Then Vernon looked at her the way some men look at a broken wagon wheel. Not with grief, not with worry, with disgust that something of his had been seen by other people. He did not love things. He claimed them. He took one step toward her, and Clara shrank before he ever touched her. A woman does not flinch like that from the man who came to save her. Vernon started calling Clara shamed, ruined, finished in this town. He said the words so quickly it sounded practiced. A husband truly shocked would ask if his wife was hurt. Vernon never asked once. He only talked about disgrace. One of the men looked at Clara's tied wrists and shook his head like her life was over already. Then he swung at Elias. No warning, no speech, just a hard right hand that caught the older man high on the cheek and sent blood into the dust. Elias staggered, but he did not reach for his Colt. He did not hit back either. He took the blow like a man who had taken worse in life and already knew the real fight was not with fists. That told Ruth plenty. Elias just stood there, took the blow, and kept one eye on Clara and one on the horse, like he knew the worst danger in that barn was not behind him. It was wearing Clara's wedding ring. By sundown, half the road into Abilene had heard some version of the story. Nobody stepped in fast enough. And in a town like that, a husband could still drag his own scandal back home before the law ever bothered to catch up. By dark, Vernon had Clara back in their house, the door bolted, the lamp low, and a paper laid out on the table for her to sign. But what finally steadied her was not the pain. It was the sight of her father's old Bible on the shelf, and the memory of him telling her that land was the one thing no man had the right to take off a woman by fear. What sat at the top of that paper would tell her exactly why he had really come to the barn that day. At the top of that paper was not a charge of adultery, not a request for forgiveness, and not one honest word. It was a transfer of Clara Bell's grazing land. Vernon had not stormed into that barn to save his wife. He had gone there to stain her name so badly she would sign away the last good thing her father ever left her. But fear can only hold a soul down so long before it turns into something stronger. Clara looked at that paper, looked at the man across from her, and for the first time she saw him plain, small, cruel, and desperate. When he pushed the pen toward her, she did not sign. When he grabbed her wrist, she pulled free. When he told her nobody would believe her now, she finally understood that a lie only owns you. If you keep carrying it. She looked at Vernon, then really looked at him, all sweat, temper, and hunger, and saw the kind of man her father had once warned her about, a man who measured his worth by what he could take from a woman. Ruth got there first. Elias came right behind her. And after that, the truth was not far behind. By the time the night was over, Vernon had lost the fight he thought he had already won. May lost more than her smile could hide, and Clara, bruised and shaken as she was, kept her land, her name, and something even more precious than both. She kept herself. A hard life can bend a person before they even know it. It can scare them, wear them down, and make them forget what they're worth. But it does not get the final word unless they surrender it. Sometimes the bravest thing a person does is not drawing a gun or throwing a punch. Sometimes it is saying no one clear time and meaning it. Any real man knows strength is not proved by frightening a woman. It is proved by standing up when something crooked is happening. Even when it would be easier to look away, watch who profits when you stay ashamed. And if life has knocked you down before, do not let it convince you that the ground is where you belong. This story was gathered and retold, with a few added details to deepen the lesson, the emotion, and the human weight of it. The images in this video are AI-assisted illustrations used to bring more feeling to the story being told. If this story stayed with you, leave a comment, give the video a like, and subscribe for the next Old Frontier tale. If you had been standing in that barn doorway, what would you have done?